Hey, listeners, don't be confused by the mix of people and names today. We are doing a special crossover episode between 515, the Ultra Podcast, and Fitspeek. We hope you enjoy this unique experience, and we have a special limited time offer for today's listeners.
And welcome again to another episode of Fitspeek, the Fraser Valley's fitness, wellness, and endurance sports podcast. I'm Kevin Heinze. Fitspeek is brought to you by A2 Bikes, tested in the tunnel, aero and affordable, based in Oregon. A2 has your next tri-bike or aero road bike available right now. Click on that black bike on our podcast page, or just go over to a2bikes.com for some eye candy and inspiration. And when you're ready to order, use our Fitspeek22 discount code and save yourself $200 on your purchase. That's a2bikes.com.
My guest today is an active 70.3 and an Ironman triathlete who has raced the Ultra 520K Canada in Penticton in 2017. In his day job, like myself, he's a teacher, but he's also a writer for Triathlon Canada website and the host of the podcast Fitspeek. If you're friends with him on Facebook, you may know him better as Sato Hydrosloth.
Oh, you found me.
515, Kevin Heinze.
Wow. I just got to share something with you, Larry. Look at this. How close you did mention, but near and dear to me, right on my podcast desk is something that reminds me of those three crazy days back in 2017. So even though I'm a recovering ultra athlete, but we'll see what my future holds. And it's good to have you on the podcast as well. This is a first for both of us. I don't think we've ever interviewed a fellow podcaster, but if you have, we're certainly breaking new ground.
I have
You're
not.
Over in Coquitlam. I'm down the Highway 7 in Mission. It's a beautiful Wednesday night. I went for a bike ride at about 5, and the highways were reasonably safe. I didn't get run over, and it's been a pretty good day.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that because I just before we started recording, you were telling me that you were into your taper week now for Coeur d'Alene. You're going to be racing down in Coeur d'Alene, and I'm sure most of the people in North America know that race. And so often when I'm interviewing people, they check that little bingo dabber down on the got hit by a car the week before a race. So yes. Please don't jinx yourself with that one.
I've been super careful on the ride today. It was like, okay, get some intensity in there and don't get injured. And there were plenty of opportunities on Highway 7 to get injured. I managed to. Holy cow, was that a 515 podcast mug?
Yes.
He's got swag. and for my listeners on the Fitspeek podcast, this is Larry Ryan. By day, like myself, a high school teacher. He's also a podcaster for the Ultra 515 podcast. Special thing for our listeners, we're going to go kind of back and forth. It's not going to be one guy asking all the questions at once. We're going to try and have, how I phrased it, kind of like a first date conversation. Larry, I get to go first. We're here in British Columbia now. Have you always lived in BC?
For a majority of my life, I've lived in BC since I was 10 years old. I was born in Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada, in Halifax. But since 10 years old, I lived in Prince George. That's in the middle of British Columbia. Lived there until I was 20, came down to go to university and haven't left since.
Okay. You made some wise choices along the way. I took the long route, like so many people growing up in Saskatchewan in the 70s. It took about 24 winters before I wised up and decided to move a little bit closer to Lotus Land. We stopped like so many people from Saskatchewan. We did about a 12-year pit stop in Calgary, paid my dues there, lived in Calgary, lived in one of the windiest cities in the country, Airdrie, Alberta. And then we had an opportunity to move out here to the Fraser Valley in 2002 and have been here ever since and have never regretted it, taxes and all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like the American California over here, I guess.
Yeah, including taxation rates, but certainly weather. And we're certainly, at least for half of the year, probably the envy of most Canadians.
For sure.
So growing up as a kid, we all play some sports. What was your jam? What were you into?
Well, I guess the only sport that I really kind of played in an organized fashion was football. I played in the community football league. We didn't have it in high school. So I did that for a while, but I really kind of played all sports and everything. So, the classic, jack of all trades and master of none. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of served me well in leading to my professional life where I became a PE teacher.
You have to know a little bit about everything. And do you have any special courses, special lessons, special sports when you're doing your phys ed course that you kind of prefer over others, seeing as you kind of got a thing for endurance sports?
Yeah. Well, I do coach the track and field at the school and the cross country.
Mhm.
So, I enjoy teaching those things as well. And volleyball, I did a lot of volleyball through
Ah,
university and things like that, like just some beach volleyball and some grass volleyball. And I remember a lot of the years we went up to Whistler for, the grass provincials up there, and we'd have some
oh,
great times in Whistler. And those are some of the fondest memories of my, late childhood when I was in
mm,
university.
yeah. Growing up back in Saskatchewan, we never, for whatever reason, I mean, we were close to a lot of NHL hockey factories, rural Saskatchewan back in the 70s. Wendell Clark lived 20 miles from where we lived. Ross Lonsbury, if you remember, back in the Philadelphia Flyer days, back in 75, 76, I used to deliver newspapers to his dad. So, I mean, hockey and curling were the big, winter sports, but we
Of
played,
course.
we specialized in road hockey. And we also, my family, table tennis, believe it or not.
Oh,
Back
wow.
in uh, back in the 80s, we were provincially ranked table tennis players. So it wasn't until my big brother gave me the push and we decided to try some endurance sports and multi-sport sort of things.
Yeah. So did you guys start off with the running and the marathons and then move over to the tri, or did you start in biking or swimming? Which one?
It started off with survival running. Like in Saskatchewan, if you didn't take your bike, you're going to walk or run everywhere. And I was not too fond of walking, so I just kind of back in and this is a silly old story, but back in about 1973, I read this book about Olympic champions. And I was reading about the marathon runners, and you probably know this guy or could pronounce his name. I cannot. He was from Finland, Pauli Nurmi or something like that. Anyway, I read this book about these amazing marathon runners. And even, at the age of 7 or 8, it's like, that sounds intriguing. I was never a sprinter. I mean, I admired sprinters and what they could do. But for me, the longer, the better. And I've been running long distance ever since about 1975 or so. Never really had anywhere to compete in small town Saskatchewan. However, I got to say this, back in 1981, it was the very first Terry Fox run
Oh,
in
yeah.
our community. And 1981, I think I ran a 48:35 10K. And that was the last time I ever beat my brother.
Wow.
I think he was a bit more hungover than I was.
Yeah, and for listeners from outside of Canada, of course, Terry Fox Run is one of the biggest runs of the year in Canada. It's in memory of Terry Fox, who was running across Canada in support of raising funds for cancer research. He was just a young man. He was like 19 when he started this run, and he started the planning for the run at least. And unfortunately, he only made it to Thunder Bay before the cancer came back. And he was a guy who was running on one leg because he
Yes.
had that one leg amputated due to cancer. And that's what really sparked him into trying to show the world that, number one, that's not going to stop anybody. And number two, that if he can get out there and run a marathon every day in an attempt to get across Canada to raise some funds, then that should hopefully, inspire other people to fight through what they need to fight through as well. And he's a big inspiration for all Canadians. And
Yeah.
we really respect all that he did for cancer research and is still doing, because Terry Fox Run is still running every year.
and Terry has a brother who lives in Chilliwack, and he's doing a lot of continued long distance cycling events for
Oh yeah. This
Terry's
is Daryl Fox.
Daryl Fox, fast duathlete, fast guy. Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'll have to get the stats from Steve King on him.
You certainly could.
When did you get into your, I don't know, 70.3s or Ironmans? Where did you jump into triathlon?
Okay, so my first exposure to multisport was in Saskatoon. So I was working as a radio announcer in Yorkton, and my silly brother discovered this thing called triathlon. But of course, in the spring in Saskatchewan, the ice is still on the rivers and lakes. So he asked me to travel with him to a duathlon in Saskatoon, and I watched it this cold, miserable morning, and I said, "Screw that! That doesn't look like any fun." 3 years later, I changed my mind. I started to bike on, one of these $24 specials, and I kind of decided I liked the pain and the suffering, and I started by doing, like a lot of people, just a sprint distance triathlon at Mount Royal College. So I think it was 300 meters swim, probably a 10K bike, probably a 3K run. And of course, I just floundered in the water. And that's why my name is Hydro Sloth. I've improved on the swimming, but it's still certainly my weak point. But that was my first multi-sport event. And of course, like any addictions, it starts small and snowballs from there. So from the sprint distance, a couple of Olympic distance races over in the Kootenays, Wasa Lake, which just had its triathlon last weekend. I did that one a number of times. Like many Albertans, one of the few half Ironman distance races back in the late 80s, early 90s was the Great White North Triathlon. Yep. And that's where, of course, I got to hear Steve King's voice for the very first time. And he's been an announcer there ever since. So I did that race quite a few times, moved out to BC and opened my eyes, and wow, what a flourishing scene there. And have done 14 Ironmans, probably about 75 or 80 halves. Nice. And I think I'm working on number 18 or 19 as far as Ironman goes, including 3 unofficial Ironman races, which I'm every bit as proud of for finishing.
And of course, in 2017 is when you did your Ultra 520K.
Yes.
How did you come to find the Ultra race? What brought you to Ultra? Was it another person who was doing it? Did you crew previously, or did you just hear about it through the grapevine?
All roads lead to Steve King. Okay. So I was there for a weekend of training just for the fun of it. And that was before we actually owned a place in the Okanagan. And I was on a ride. And as I was cruising through this park in Okanagan Falls on a Saturday afternoon, I heard some noise, and I heard Steve King's voice, and I said, something's got to be up. So I drove through there, and sure enough, Steve King is finishing, or rather announcing the finish part, the cycling part of the Ultra 520K, I believe. And he introduced me to the guy who had set the course record that day, Dave Matheson, I believe. Of course. And, they welcome, this Ohana stuff. You've heard of this, right? Ohana. I know. And it was that. It's like, here, take a look at this. Become one of us. And the words that Steve King, how he speaks so intensely, and the voice is still, ingrained in my brain. He said, Kevin, do this while you still can. So 2 years later, I finally screwed up the courage and I signed up for it. And Steve Brown took my check, and I added another chapter to my endurance sports life.
Yeah, amazing. And it's so funny because I've been going to those races since 2010 and been there every year since, except 2017. 2017 was the 1 year that I missed going for the event. So
we missed each
other on that one.
Do you have a good reason for not being there in 2017?
I think, I don't remember. I don't recall. Yeah.
Because since 1990, for sure 1990. I have missed one Ironman Canada in Penticton, and I was unhappy with my athletic performance, and I was just kind of bitter at the time. I said, I don't want to go watch these people. But that was the only time I had actually missed since 1990. I've seen a lot of fun stuff, a lot of memorable races out on the pavement in Penticton, Okanagan Falls, through Olala and all that, as well as the new course.
Yeah. Let me ask you another question about the Ultra 520K. I was talking earlier about the bingo card, the Ultra bingo card, because there's just certain things that come up in all of my interviews of people that do things that will inevitably, mess with their race. So, it's like getting hit by a car, breaking their bike on the way to the race, with the shipping, forgetting some important piece of equipment on race day, all those kind of things that come up and are part of the challenges of doing ultra. But you've got one that I haven't seen on a bingo card before. What was your big challenge going into the Ultra 520 in 2017?
Dude, that was one smooth segue. Yes. So I was doing this ultra to get the full ultra experience, or whatever I thought it was. So leading up to the podcast, or leading up to the race, I'm getting as much information from as many people as I can, and that's what I learned of people like, for example, Chad Bentley, and just trying to absorb as much information. I talked to Dave Matheson, how do you approach this? And I thought part of the joy, or part of the whole process, the experience of doing an ultra, is to try different stuff, because each distance of a race tends to have its own. There's a broad cardio base for sure, but I wanted to experience the ultra. So I went on these crazy long bike rides, and I never actually got to the running phase of crazy, because what had happened is, a couple of months out of the race, I had a crazy long weekend. I did a 210 kilometer charity ride on Saturday, and the temperature for the ride was probably 32 degrees. Had a great, event. And then the next day, like 12 hours after that, I did an Olympic distance triathlon in Cultus Lake. And the day after that, I had a 2.5 hour run in Penticton with a friend of mine. And the day after that, I kind of contracted meningitis.
All right, so there you go. Like meningitis, that hasn't been on the bingo card before.
Yeah.
So tell me what happened to you physically with this, and then what lasting remnants of that was there going into your race?
Yeah, I discovered I wasn't myself the day after that long run with my friend in Penticton. We had went on a bike ride which included the wall. And the wall kicked my butt like never before, and I struggled just to make it home, and that was pretty humbling for me. And really, it felt like I got hit by a '72 Buick. I was just knocked on my butt. My energy levels were low. My will to live was pretty much 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. I couldn't eat. I had this throbbing headache. I did not want to see the sun ever again in my life. So for about the next 4 days, I just locked myself in a dark room. I went out. It was weird, because all of my senses of pleasure, all of them just diminished. Stop eating meat, didn't want to drink beer, didn't want to drink coffee. Those are some major red flags for me. Yeah. So it was a long, protracted, and kind of a puzzling ordeal with the medical system, because it was after the thing had run its course, which lasted about 3 weeks of really tough going. The doctors kind of figured, oh well, you may have meningitis. That's what you got. Yeah, we'll. So yeah, it was. And then going in, of course, to the ultra race, it's like, well, I haven't done any legitimate run training, but I can run a little bit. I know I can swim at least 3 kilometers. Let's see what 10, or in my case 11 will be like. And the biking, I figured I could do that, so I was somewhat confident. Yeah.
What was your longest run prior to doing the double marathon?
Ever? That's a good question. Probably it would have been back in 2000 when I was training for my very first Ironman. I had probably went 44 kilometers in one day.
Okay.
So, 84 compared to 44, big difference. And the run between, where did we start? In Princeton
Princeton to Summerland.
Summerland, I was in no way prepared in any way, spiritually, mentally, physically, to deal with any of that.
Yeah, but you were a finisher of that race. You can say that you are a 5:15, well, a 5:20 in this case finisher.
Yes,
So
yes. Let's flip it on you. So you said that you were a well-rounded sports guy. You're a phys ed teacher now. We won't talk about highlights from your sporting career because you talked about doing a lot of volleyball. So you run a podcast, an ultra podcast, 5:15. What drew you to this whole endurance sports crowd, considering you're not really a tri guy?
yeah, it was being the husband of a triathlete that drew me to this. I know that you know my ex-wife, Lucy Ryan. She's been on your podcast before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so basically, I've crewed every race she's done back in those days, and so once she got into the Ultraman, at that time it was the Ultraman Canada that Steve Brown was running. When she got into that, obviously I was along for the ride and crewing, and I've just always been so amazed by the people that you meet when you go to these things. So it doesn't matter that I'm not an athlete in this community. Anybody who gets into this community, whether they're crew members, they could just be a family member there supporting the athlete, and once you kind of get into that Ohana bubble, and it's not like it's a secret to get in. You just show up at one of these races and you're a part of it. It's not as cliquey as some might think, right? Everybody is part of this Ohana, and I couldn't help but to keep going back. And when Lucy wasn't racing, her and I would go back and crew for other people, so like that's how I ended up meeting Brad Sawa. We crewed for Brad one year, and then I've crewed for Juan Criveri out of Argentina. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's done like every ultra race in the world and probably 200 Ironman races by now. Tony Horton, who started the Ultraman race in Australia. Lucy and I crewed for him one year. Ross Welton, who came into the Ultra 520K sick as a dog, finished the race and came back the next year and won it.
Wow.
And then his wife, Katie, we've crewed for her. And then most recently, I was down in Arizona and crewing for Shane Duffy. I don't know if you've been listening to my podcast, but he's the first person to do all 4 of the Ultraman branded races in a year. And he bookended that with Ultraman Australia on each end. So he did 6 ultra races in one calendar year, or 12 months.
Wow, superhuman, and obviously a person of means to be able to pursue something like that, considering I know what it cost for one, which I drove to.
Right, yeah. So I mean, those are just some of the people I've met that I've crewed for and stuff like that, but you meet so many of the other people at the race as well, and that's why with the podcast it's so important to me. It's just to keep in touch with those people and to make new connections with those people. Everybody has great stories, and my podcast is really about that. It's about the 5:15 athletes and their stories. And in my podcast, I try to get outside of just the regular, what race did you do? How did it go? Blah, blah, blah. We talk a lot about their other things that they do in life, whether it's their job or their things that they're involved in, and their kids, and, the kind of things that you talk about when you meet them at the races. And so I'm trying to just bring that into my podcast and share that to the world.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of it, a good podcast is about interesting conversations, and that usually comes from, authentic storytelling, which I think we strive for as podcasters.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing your 5:15 podcast?
I started my podcast in January of 2021.
Mm.
And I originally got the idea in November of 2020 to do a podcast.
Uh-huh. What was
So
that? What was the motivation, the spark?
the motivation was as a way to promote the Ultraman Canada race. So
Okay.
at the time, I was, co-race director of Ultraman
Mhm.
Canada with Brad and the new reincarnation of it after Steve had moved on to his 520 brand, and the whole story behind how he was going to put that one to bed. So then
Yes.
Brad kind of brought back Ultraman Canada. Um, so in January of 2021 is when I had my first episode. So I learned how to make a podcast in 2 months.
Yeah.
And since then, every 3 weeks, I come out with a new episode, and I'm up to 63 episodes right now.
Hmm. All focused on the ultra community.
Yes, all focused on the ultra community. And the great thing is, I've just been seeing such great growth over the last little while. We've been downloaded in 79 countries and over 1,650 cities around the world. So,
Wow, you are bad. You are international. Mhm.
yes.
Well,
So
and the ultra community is a reflection of that, right?
that's
I mean,
exactly right.
you go to an ultra man race, an ultra 515 race. I mean, my experience, people from Spain, from Australia, New Zealand. I mean, it's an international
It is.
event as opposed to going to do a local 5K where everybody's from within driving distance, right? So,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
that's reflected in your demographics, your listeners.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
let me hear a little bit about your podcast for my listeners then. How long have you been doing yours? What's your focus? And where can they find it? What was that name again? Because it's spelled a little bit funny. Why is it spelled like that?
The origins of the Fitspeek brand or podcast, whatever, was actually like so many things in my life out of anger and frustration and that sort of stuff. Now,
Mhm.
that might sound kind of weird, but I've always loved to write. And it got to a point where we have a community triathlon page on Facebook. And I would take the time to think through my posts and really work on creating a piece
Mhm.
and putting it out there, whether it's a race report, my thoughts on training, or something like that. So we would put it on this Facebook page, and within probably 20 minutes, it's like, oh, look, flashing object. And my post would get buried up under pictures of kitties and, running shoes and crap like that. And it only took about 6 months of that frustration to make me think, maybe I should just have my own space for doing this. And if I want to take it seriously, the only person who's going to bump me off the front page is me doing something else. So originally it was just going to be a blog spots
Oh, yeah.
and that sort of thing. But then I started listening to Bob Babbitt, Breakfast with Bob and all that stuff, and listening to his interviews. And that really started to make me think, this could be a pretty fun thing to do, meet some cool people. And, at the end of the day, maybe someday way down the road, I could make a couple of bucks doing this. Of course, both you and I know that's maybe not the truest motivator for doing a podcast. So the blog spot became a podcast, and I primarily started just with local. My background is radio, so I wanted to promote local races. So if there was a 5K happening, charity run, anything to do with stuff happening at our local leisure centers. And so we did that for a few years, and the podcast changed over time. And right now, primarily, we are still an endurance-based podcast. So, of course, we'll do triathlon, but we've got other endurance sports, long-distance swimmers. We've got we've got this amazing athlete out of Kelowna, Megan Hakkinen, who is an amazing long distance cyclist. We've had her on the program. So if it's long and it's crazy and there's a good story, or if it's local and it's happening, that's what Fitspeek is all about. So it's www.fitspeek, and it's spelled FITSPEEK.com. And we have an upcoming interview, which should be published probably in a couple of days, with local triathlete Rach McBride. So she's ripping up things on the 70.3 scene. She's going to be doing a big race in Mt Tremblant, Quebec here in a few weeks. So if you all are into the shorter distance stuff, it's www.fitspeek.com. So tell me about some of the, I mean, you said 63 or 73 podcasts now?
63.
63. Okay. So you have some good ones, you have some not so good ones, I'm sure, because I've got stories to tell about podcasts gone bad and good. You go first. What are some of the highlights, lowlights, stuff you'd rather forget and bury?
I can't say that I have any lowlights in my podcast. They've turned out pretty good. As far as guests, in my second episode, I had a Japanese athlete on, Makoto Hoshino, and we just laughed the entire time. Part of it was because, he wasn't even understanding parts of what I was saying.
Yeah.
So, we had a great time. I ended up hosting him here when he came to do the race last year. So, that was one right off the bat. Also this year, I had Yvonne Timewell and Dee Dee Griesbauer on.
Oh.
So getting people of that caliber to come on.
Yeah.
Dee Dee's such a great speaker.
Yes.
And Ferg Hawk, Rick Kent. These are two of the most popular downloaded episodes I've had because they, again, are such great storytellers. And then some of my previous shows have been quite popular as well because I try and reach out to all the different 515 races and get them to do previews of their athletes that are coming.
Yeah.
And coming up again soon, I've done like Ultra MX with Van Sanchez.
Yes, Van everywhere.
Yeah. I've done the Ultra Czech 515, and those guys are coming back again with me in August. And earlier this season, I did the Brazil 515. Those guys were great. And coming up also toward the end of this year, I'm going to do the UMUK race and the Infiniti Man in Spain. So I try and reach out to the entire community and make sure that, everyone's being connected.
Yeah, so that explains, like we were talking about previously, why you're such a international sensation, right? I mean, you go the distance around the globe to speak with these people.
Yeah, and of course, I got to add one more though, because probably my number one guest is my first guest, and that was Steve King. I had Steve King for a 3-part interview where we talked about different parts of his life, his racing, and his life as a clinical counselor and playing music, and then all of the other parts. And so in my first 3 episodes, I broke that up, and Steve was there, and he's been on more than anybody else doing race wrap-ups and race previews and just coming on to talk. So Steve King, of course, is my number one guy. I love that guy, and he always has amazing stories and backs it up with the stats like no one else. Now, tell me about maybe some of those amazing stories that have happened on your podcast, and apparently you have some failures as well. So those are always great stories.
Oh, yeah. People love the failures. And I asked them, I mean, what do you learn from all the screw ups? And you can screw up in so many ways. It's awesome, right? So Brent McMahon, had an interview with him, an amazing speaker. We hit it off. We had a lot of shared experiences. We had talked, we had done Whistler the same year. Of course, he was like 4 hours ahead of me. But at the end of it, for some reason, the sound quality between Brent, which was terrible, and mine, which was really, really good. It's like, man, I just spent 45 minutes with this guy. I have to do something with this. So I went into my sound processing system or recording system called Audacity and tried my darndest to make this thing salvageable. And I posted it, and I felt like I had just swallowed like some gasoline or something. It's like, it's out there. The content is good, but the sound quality is just the shits. And it's like, well, just hope maybe somebody will listen. So even though the rapport was there, and it just wasn't great. Another Canadian triathlete, the failure. I mean, and it's funny, humans are humans. And as much as I psych myself up for these interviews, sometimes I'm the one who's flat. So it was only about 11 months ago, and Cody Beals, I've had him on the program. He's Ironman champion. He'd probably be contending at Ironman Mt Tremblant again. He's like one of our nation's fastest. And I just fell into a funk, and it's like, I'm just going through the motions here. I'm just saying these words, and you're just saying, and we're just playing these parts. And it was so far from being authentic. And I just, he was finishing a question. I said, hey, hate to do this, but I just ain't feeling it. So we just shut her down early rather than just flog it. So thankfully he was understandable, or understanding rather, because those are two different words. And we still talk, and he's he'll be on the podcast again. But for some reason, I just went kind of brain dead and just finished it. And then there's another time I had a great interview. Don't know who it was. Forgot to hit record. So it can happen. It has happened, and hopefully it's not going to happen too frequently in the future. But as far as good stuff goes, anytime Steve King is on the show, I did a cool Christmas special. I had a fella from Australia, Nick Mallet. Yeah, so I had Nick and Steve King on at the same time, and that was always a fun podcast.
I listened to that episode.
Yeah, Nick is a character, and a guy who I felt like I've known all my life, Scott Tinley, Ironman legend, had him on the program. It's like talking to my brother. We had so many shared experiences. We knew a lot of the same. Well, we're about the same age. We have about the same sort of jobs, so it's like we hit it off, and it was just the chemistry was freaking amazing. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, on that topic, we got a couple of things in common too, because we're both teachers. My listeners know I'm a teacher, and I teach phys ed in high school. How about you? Where's your teaching gig?
I actually teach behind bars, not too far from Coquitlam, not too far from Mission. I do a double header 2 days a week. I'm at a place called Fraser Regional Correctional Center, which is a 2-year less a day joint for the guys. And for 2 days a week, I'm at Alouette Correctional Institution for women, and that's the same sort of thing for females who are serving a jail sentence of 2 years less a day. So that's been my main money making gig for the past 20 years now.
Now, are these youth corrections, or are these adults that just need more education?
Yeah, these are adults who want to. And that's the key word. They want to go back to school. So being in a prison, there's some programs you have to take, particularly those that have to do with anger management or substance management in order to earn your brownie points so you can get out early. The education program is not like that. It's not mandated. So the folks who sign up either want free pens or their grade 12 diploma.
Well, we don't want them getting pens. Prison.
Well, they do get pens. They get, and that's one of the big perks. A lot of this is driven by people who enter the program, and they do get their fancy pens. I think they're worth about 20 or 24 cents. They're called Bic Shimmers, and they come in pink and purple and green. So it's an incentive. So there's some internal motivation or some external motivation. But at the end of the day, they sign up for school, and on good days they produce a lot of work, and it's very, very gratifying work. Yeah.
Let me just follow up with that. Your area is English, like your background is for teaching English, and I guess that lends itself to doing the writing that you like to do. Tell me a little bit about the writing that you've done for Triathlon magazine or website, I guess it is.
Well, it's all of the above. So before I got into teaching, I was a radio broadcaster in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and the pay was not great. And after getting fired one too many times, I decided to reevaluate my career and thought, talking and social studies and that sort of stuff is kind of like what I'm after. So went into university, became a high school social studies teacher, but I always carried that passion for public speaking and writing and doing creative stuff. So after a few years of just doing the teaching thing, I thought, okay, I've got some spare time on my hands. And then I started, writing I wouldn't say practice, but spec spots for Triathlon Magazine Canada. And after a couple of, knocks on the door through an email, the editor of the magazine, Kevin McKinnon, finally relented. And I got my first article published, which I have, framed on the wall. And
Nice.
Ever since then, I think that's been for about 5 years now. I've been writing most, if you've read the magazine in the past 5 years, most magazines will have something of mine in there. And what they do is spin some of that stuff that's in print onto their website as well. There's also some other stuff, an online only edition, and that's where I get a lot of my smaller pieces covered, whether it's covering races, doing promo spots. I also do the occasional opinion piece and live to regret it.
So do you get a lot of feedback?
This is the hard, cold truth. When I was working in radio, one of my main gigs was being the midnight to 6 guy, and nothing, echo. You could do almost anything and get away with it, or do something amazing and nobody would care. And truth is, nothing. Not a lot of feedback. Not on the podcast, not on the writing, which I'm okay with. I mean, it's kind of a one-sided thing. I'm hoping somebody out there is enjoying it, is appreciating it. But truth be told, not a hell of a lot of feedback, Larry.
Oh, come on. People, send Kevin some love. Tell him that you appreciate what he's doing.
Do you?
I get enough to keep me interested. It's like people reach out through Facebook, or they'll write something in there and just tell me like, hey, I really like what you're doing. I love that interview. That person's I'm a big fan of that person, so I listened. And so it doesn't happen as much as I would like. So my listeners, please also send me some love if you like. Keep me motivated. But it does happen enough that, and I appreciate every time somebody does take just, that 60 seconds to write a quick line saying, hey, I thought that one was really great, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I get enough feedback as a teacher from my administrators, so that's all I need. Let's talk about some other stuff. I mean, my goodness, you've been doing the podcast. You also are dabbling, or maybe that's the wrong word because I'm an English guy, but as a race director. So my question would be, as primarily you're earning your paycheck as a phys ed teacher, how does being a podcaster, how does being a race director affect the way you do your day-to-day job as a phys ed guy?
I don't think there's a lot of crossover there. If anything, it might go the other way in that the things that I've done teaching, I've been able to bring over and use in what I did when I was race directing with Ultraman Canada, like the whole organization of it and putting the steps together for the organization. I used to teach a leadership class where we would put on events at school. And so I had this process, that I would teach. And so I was able to bring it over to the race and put it into practice, So, I don't think it goes the other way, but it definitely comes back.
It flows more in one direction than the other.
Yeah. So,
Larry, how was it that you became the race director for the Ultraman Canada?
That's an interesting story. I was actually co-race director with Brad. He was the race director the first year that it came back. And he was supposed to be doing it with Mike Brown. You probably know that name from doing a lot of different races in Penticton.
Challenge Penticton, Super League.
Yeah. And the Great White North that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and all those races and a bit of residue from those races, I've heard.
Yeah, so I guess I was on my 2019 summer holiday. And me and my girlfriend, we went on a road trip. I like to do road trips on my summer holiday. And we drove up to Tuktoyaktuk.
No way.
Yes. So
you can drive there.
You can drive there now, yes. So people that don't know what Tuktoyaktuk means, it is the northernmost northernmost place in Canada that you can now drive to. It's on the Arctic Ocean, well above the Arctic Circle. And for
That's
years,
kind of where the Mackenzie River dumps in, right?
I
And there's
believe,
this massive delta.
yes, it is basically, that was part of the problem, was the delta in building a highway up there. So for years, they used to just have ice roads where you could travel there in the winter. And they finished this new highway where now you can go all year long. And I was like, well, I've been coast to coast. I might as well go to the other coast.
Wow.
And yeah, we did that trip. It was 10,500 kilometers long over about 21 days.
Wow. And what kind of a vehicle were you driving?
Oh, we rented an SUV.
Oh, rented. You're no fool.
Yeah. Unlimited mileage. I'm sure they were shocked when they got it back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we were coming back around on the end of that trip, and we were over in Alberta, coming back through the Okanagan, and I knew the race was coming up again. So I called up Brad, and I'm like, hey, Brad, I'm going to be going through Penticton. You want to get together? I want to hear about your race. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, sure. Come stay at my house. And so we went, and we were hanging out, and he looked a little bit like a deer in the headlights when he was telling me the story of how Mike Brown decided he was not going to be coming to the race. Oh. This was about 2 weeks before the race was supposed to be put on.
Oh my goodness.
And I guess Mike had some other issues with his other races in the city, and there was just a falling out there. So Brad was in a little bit of a pinch. So I was like, hey, you know what? I'll help you out. I'll come back. I've been around this race since 2010. I know the course inside and out. I've talked to Steve Brown a lot. I think I can add something to this and help you out. So I came back up the next week, about 10 days ahead of the race. Or I guess it was only after that weekend, I came right back and found out that there really wasn't much planned. Brad thought that Mike was organizing it because that's his job as a professional race director. And there were a lot of balls still on the ground.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, we kind of like put it together real quick. I was creating the welcome slideshow and the rules and all that stuff in the days leading up. And the day that the athletes were checking in, I was writing the Ministry of Transportation application on the computer while we were checking them in. It was pretty crazy. I brought some signage up. I ran for school trustee one year, so I brought up my old election signs, and we taped directional signs over them so people would know where to turn left and right. And we kind of cobbled it together. Some people might remember the kind of sad finish line that we had because again,
what made it sad?
It wasn't organized until 2 days before the race. And basically the only thing that we could find that was even close to being the right type of thing was a backdrop for a wedding, like where they put up curtains, So we sourced that out of Osuyus, and we went and got like a 10 foot by 10 foot frame. And that's all we could get. And then we had to like put a banner over top of it that we got rush ordered out of the trophy shop. And
in Penticton.
In Penticton, yeah.
So, wow.
But all in all, like I had such a great time kind of trying to resolve all those issues and identifying where they might be. That I had fun with it. And at the end of it, we were like
had fun with it in a same sort of way somebody would consider driving to Tuktoyaktuk fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So at the end of it, Brad was like, well, do you want to keep doing this with me? We can try and get the full 5-year agreement. I was like, yeah.
Because I don't think Mike Brown's coming back.
Exactly. Yeah. So I said, yeah, it sounds like fun. And then over the next couple of years, I kind of got to learn all the ins and outs of putting on a race, like how to do I redid the webpage and then did the application and read all the applications and did all that and created swag and ordered swag and pretty much every step along the way that you need to do to run a race. I was, putting my hand in and taking care of those things. So over the last few years of being on that race with him, I was able to, get the full sense of what the race director does. Even, not that I didn't know before, but I felt like I had a good handle on it and that I was doing a good job with it. And while it didn't work out between me and Brad, I still feel like, I learned a lot while I was there. So that's kind of how I accidentally became a race director.
Well, speaking of being a race director, pause. I understand you've got some exciting news to share with the Ultra Triathlon community and the Canadian triathlon community.
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking. I would like to announce that I will be putting on a new Ultra Tri-Fest in Whistler, British Columbia. This will be like on the traditional 520 weekend established by Steve Brown. So the August long weekend, we're going to go up to Whistler and I'm going to put a whole Tri-Fest together. There'll be a 515 race. There'll be a 515 nonstop inspired by the work of Van Sanchez. There'll be a 515 relay. We're going to do a 360 version. So the shorter version, but still 3-day. That one will go unsupported. So you're going to be on your own out there with some water stations. And then because we're going to be in Whistler, we are going to add a 260 kilometer gravel 3-day ultra.
Whoa, that's adventurous.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about this. I think you probably realize that, like the podcast, people don't make money in organizing these races. In fact, a lot of the time they lose money. And my format and thinking is that if I can put these different races together at the same time, I can bring in some extra athletes that kind of helps offset the cost of setting up that start finish line and the permits and the insurance, that maybe I'll be able to hopefully break even and then maybe have a little bit left over, for the hundreds of hours that it takes to put this thing together.
Oh, it's just an amazing undertaking for a race director to do anything. I mean, there's so many things to think about. And thankfully, you're going to be doing it. You're an organized guy. You've got a lot of experience doing this. And by the sounds of it, from what you've been doing with your podcast, you're highly methodical. So there's going to be bumps, but you're also a very flexible and kind of a roll with it kind of guy because of the inevitable things that are going to be happening. And you said, oh my goodness, why not Penticton? Why Whistler?
That's a great question. And when people think of triathlon, especially around British Columbia, we always think of Penticton. But there are lots of great Canadian cities out there that are involved in triathlon. Obviously Victoria is up there. Edmonton, you were talking about the Great White North. Mt Tremblant, everybody knows that one. Even Corner Brook, Newfoundland has got a reputation for triathlon. And obviously Whistler had Ironman Canada for a while.
Yeah.
And the issue of having that one road in and out and shutting down the road was not great for Whistler. But a 515 race doesn't shut down the road. So
yes,
they do have a great triathlon community up there. I've been in touch with them. They are going to be helping to host this event. Some of the major players up there, one of them is Marla Zook, who finished the 515 race in Penticton recently. She's part of the triathlon club up there. She's going to be on board and helping me out with this. Christian Manetta, who is now the director of the Xterra races up there, and he has his own endurance-specific coaching that he does with his wife, Charlotte Paul, and they are Ironman champions. So he also is a podcaster. So he's a podcaster, a race director, an athlete, a coach. He does it all. He's been giving me a lot of advice, and he took over those races from Dale Thiessen, who is another Whistler resident, and he's the one who started the off-road triathlon that became the Xterra, and he worked with Christian on that for a few years before he had to step away due to other busy things in his life. But next year, along with those two, he's also looking to get a swim run event happening in Whistler. So yeah, I have these three people that are highly respected in the Whistler area. I've also brought on Chad Bentley, from the North Shore. He's going to come and help me out. My ex-wife, Lucy Ryan, has been around this scene for a long time, is going to be on board as part of the main crew putting this together. Peter Lipinski from up in Oliver, former 3-time finisher at the 5:15 distance. So I've surrounded myself with people who've got great knowledge and built a team around that. So I'm really excited about bringing these people together and putting on this race, and not even more than that, the little cherry on top. Person we've been talking about so much already on this episode.
Again, yes, SK.
I got Steve King to commit to come and be part of the race as well. So I feel like I got all the pieces in place to put this together. I've been working on it for a couple of months now. And thank you for inviting me on to Fitspeek to be able to have this announcement.
So now we have a new race that we can talk about, we can promote, Whistler. And for folks outside of the ultra community, you're missing out on a cool experience. And like you were saying, the tradition is it's the August long weekend, which actually works well for a lot of different things. For the folks, I've heard it done before. Folks will actually do the ultra in early August and use that as kind of a training experience or a stimulus for Ironman Canada. Absolutely. Because if you're used to being on a bike for 270K, oh heck, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, this is a piece of cake. It's only 180. So you're getting that. Plus, generally, that's a pretty trustworthy time of year to hold a race.
Yeah. And, you're talking about why not Penticton. And another part of why not Penticton is, unfortunately, in Penticton, that time of year, it's now become apparent that every year is going to be smoky, with the forest fires. And down here in Whistler, so far, it's been, it's more rainforest down here. It's a little bit better. It's not that dry desert. It doesn't happen down here, So I was thinking that's another good reason I'm not going to have to change a course on the fly like we've done so many times.
Yes.
And honestly, I feel like Penticton has just kind of got a little bit of volunteer fatigue, so many of their events up there, it's been the same people year after year. And that's why Steve Brown has stepped away from this as well. It's hard to get the people to come on board and help you with that. So that's why I thought it was really important to get the new blood and the Whistler blood into this and some of my friends to help out with that, because it'll bring new energy to the race now. And that'll be exciting as well.
So it's not going to be, what race is happening in Penticton this weekend, this summer? Is it the Elvis Festival? Is it the Ultra Swim? Is it the Ironman? Is it the Peach Classic? So your point well taken. It's not going to be just another race, which is almost the case for Penticton and the South Okanagan.
Yeah. And part of the other thing behind that is, the last couple of times I've been up to Penticton, the accommodations have gotten really hard up there. If you don't book a year in advance, you're pretty slim pickings. You might get an Airbnb for $1,000 a night, and those older hotels up there are $300 a night in the summer. So some people might think, Whistler, it's going to be too expensive to go to Whistler. It's probably comparable, if not cheaper, in Whistler than it is in Penticton right now, because there's just so much more capacity up there, and there'll be something for every budget in Whistler.
Right. And another thing that Whistler's got going for it, being the international event that it is, folks can fly into Vancouver and get straight up the Highway 99, which shouldn't take too long, as opposed to trekking out to the Okanagan and getting lost and winding up in Kamloops. It's happened.
Whistler is a world destination. People know it. It hosted the 2010 Winter Olympics. So, it can host international events, and mine's obviously a much smaller event, but it welcomes them, and it's a great playground to go and do these races. And we'll be utilizing a lot of what was the Ironman Canada course when we're up there.
Where are they swimming?
The swim is going to be down at Ultra Lake at a Rainbow Park. So same as what the Ironman did.
Mhm.
And the day one bike ride will utilize essentially what was the Ironman Canada course. It'll go down to Pemberton and out on the flats and the meadows back there, which is just beautiful scenery. And it'll come back through the village and go up to Callahan, up where the Winter Olympics had some events. So that's a nice big climb for them, and come back to the city. And then on day two, the bike is for people that don't know the area. Maybe I'm going on a little bit too much, but for people that do, it's going to go up toward Darcy and then all the way down to Squamish and back.
So what else can you tell our potential racers about the event? It's going to be happening August 2024. So don't sign up for a 2023 race. That ain't happening.
Yes. So yeah, the first race, the inaugural race will be August 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2024. And what I was going to do, just special for our listeners, is I'm not going to announce this on social media until 3 days after we release this podcast.
Aha.
So if you want to get the head start on signing up for the race, our listeners are going to get the head start. And it'll be at ultratrifestcanada.com. ultratrifestcanada.com.
A new website has been born.
But, as Steve Jobs says, there is one more thing that I would like to tell you about. As part of this Ultra Tri-Fest, there is going to be one other race involved in the Ultra Tri-Fest, and that is what I am calling the Ultra 515 Worldwide Championships.
I was thinking underpants run, but okay.
So I think most of my listeners know that the Ultraman Championship, the World Championship in Hawaii, is like the big race of the 515 community. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that race only invites people who do other Ultraman branded races.
Yes.
And currently there are only 3 of those: Arizona, Florida, and Canada. So around the world, there are at least 15 other 515 races happening, because what was started in Hawaii, and I give all the appreciation and props to the people of Hawaii, what started there has spread around the world, and other people have put on these races now. But unfortunately, while they call it a world championship, they're not inviting the world to come to it. And in doing the podcast and speaking to all the people I've met and speaking to the other race directors, there's a clear demand, a want to go to a world championship, and these people are not being invited. So I thought, why not put together a new world championship, one that invites everybody? And that's going to be my way of giving back to the people that are part of this community.
Mm-hmm. So it gives other people, other than those folks who are going to be Hawaii bound, an opportunity to race at that event, competing against other champions at that distance.
Yeah. And the way I'm going to do it is basically, it's not going to be an invitational. If you win a 515 event in the world or longer, you're automatically in the race. All you got to do is say, I want to come to the race, and you're in. So all the champions come to the race. And then after that, what I want to do is to make sure it's open to everybody. I've come up with a little bit of a lottery system to first favor, other top athletes and people who have raced in the last 12 months. But it will give everybody an opportunity who has ever raced in a 515 event at any time in their life. So it could be you did, the Ultra 520K back in 2017. Because you finished it, you get to enter the lottery as well, and hopefully get one of those spots that are available to the lottery entrants. And then that'll fill out the field once all the champion spots are taken.
Gotcha. Clever marketing and clever opportunity to get people involved in this race. And, ultra races by their very nature are kind of lonely. I mean, you've got your crew there for support, but to have a few extra people out on the course, and especially at the banquets, right? The starting breakfast, and the one that wraps the whole thing up. It just spreads the ohana, right?
Exactly. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, like I recognize that for a lot of people, just like in Ironman, going to Hawaii is going to be the dream, right? But there's also a lot of people who are missing out. So for anybody that's not part of that Ultraman brand, they will have now that spot to have a world championship as well. And I'm not going to be exclusive. If Ultraman racers want to come, you're welcome too, right? They're, if the winner of Ultraman Canada wants to come to the World Championship, come on, and enter the lottery if you've been an Ultraman racer before. So everybody's going to be welcome. That's the idea, and hopefully, it'll gives the people a way to more economically get to a World Championship. Because when I've talked to people, they go to a race like Ultraman Australia, or they go to a race like Ultra Czech or Brazil, and then they get hooked into this ohana, and they're like, oh, I want to go to the World Championship. Well, you haven't qualified to go to the World Championship by doing that race. Yes. So now you have to go do another race in North America to qualify, and then come back to North America a second time if you make it to the invitational list to go to the World Championship.
Yes.
And for a lot of people, that's a lot of money, a lot of time away, all of that stuff. So part of my process is all of these other 15, 16 races around the world. You can now go to a regional race. You can go to whatever's closest to you, whether it's Siberman or Ultra Czech or, the Ultra MX down with Fan Sanchez. And then that is your qualifier, not making trips halfway across the world to try and qualify for this.
Anything else you'd like to tell our listeners or potential racers for the event?
I guess the main thing would be that, as I said, these races need people to be successful. I would really like to see full fields. I am going to have small fields to run this first one to make sure it's okay. The worldwide championship, I'm going to go with a full 50. I want to have 25 men and 25 women. It's going to be equal number in the field. So I need those people to actually say they want to come. And then for the Canada event of 5:15, I'm going to keep the number down at 20, and then up to 10 people on the nonstop event, and up to 5 relay teams. So I'm going to keep the numbers a little bit smaller on those events to see how the capacity works out. And I'm going to have the World Championship go the opposite direction of the other racers. So you won't be getting all crowded on the road together. You'll be going in different directions.
Oh, yes, those crowds.
So the crews will be spaced out, and, again, I've kind of gone through it logistically and planned out what I think would be an issue and found a solution. So, and then that 360 and the 260 races, I'm inviting 30 people to sign up for those races.
Okay. So go to that website and start looking around, and then commit.
And commit, yes. Because that's one of the things that happened with the Ultra 355 Canada is a lot of people were like, hey, that sounds like a great race. Maybe I'll do it next year. And Steve Brown didn't have enough people sign up to actually run the race. So
I know he was
if we're going to put on these races and you think they're a good idea, you got to sign up and take part. And for good reason. I mean, committing, to a 10K, even to a marathon is pretty heavy, but this is next level of commitment. This is up there with, wife, husband. This is a major commitment. And, I mean, if all goes well, it's, you're going to reflect on this for the rest of your life in a positive way, because these things do change people's lives. Absolutely. And nobody makes you feel like a rock star like Steve King calling you in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I got a couple of final questions for you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
I know you're a meticulous research kind of guy, so you may have heard our traditional Fitspeek ending. question. I'm going to start with another one. Larry Ryan, tell me the date of your very first triathlon that you will be participating in.
That date is yet to be determined.
Okay,
I'm a terrible swimmer.
We're gonna hold you. Okay, last question. If you could be an animal other than a human being, what animal would you be, Larry? Tell us why.
Maybe like an eagle.
Mm.
You know, I would like to have that bird's eye view, that ability to soar and fly and be free and be able to look down and have the big picture. I'm a big picture
yes.
kind of guy. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to Fitspeek with us. Some big news happening with Larry Ryan's new event in Whistler. And what is that website again for our listeners to check out?
It is ultratrifestcanada.com. And thank you for being my guest on 515, the Ultra Podcast, because this is a first. We've done the cross promotion. We're both going to release the same episode to our listeners. So this will be exciting to see how it all turns out. And hopefully we get some comments on it.
That would be nice. Thanks for your time, Larry.
Thank you for yours.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, please tell a friend and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd appreciate it if you'd rate and review the show while you're there. Drop the names of the people you think we should interview and we'll get in touch with them and make that happen. Thank you for listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, a production of 55 Enterprises. Now really, go subscribe now before you forget.